The NES was first released in Japan on July 15, 1983 as the Family Computer, otherwise known as the Famicom. It was later released and redesigned as the Nintendo Entertainment System in several test markets in the United States beginning on October 18th of 1985. It was then followed by a nationwide launch on September 27th of 1986. The NES is widely regarded as one of the most influential gaming consoles of all time and helped revitalize the American gaming industry following the video game crash of 1983. While there were a plethora of NES games during its tenure, there are about 20 or so that I could not get enough of. Here are 10 of my all-time favorite NES games. DuckTales. DuckTales is a platform game developed and published by Capcom and based on the Disney animated TV series of the same name. It was first released in North America for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1989. Players control Scrooge McDuck as he travels around the world and in outer space in search of 5 treasures to further increase his fortune. Scrooge is able to attack enemies and get around using his cane. On the ground, Scrooge can swing his cane to attack enemies and to break open or throw certain objects. While jumping, Scrooge can bounce on his cane similarly to a pogo stick and attack enemies from above. Scrooge will also encounter various characters from the series who have a variety of roles, such as providing hints, offering useful items, opening access to new areas, or attempting to stop Scrooge's progress. 2 secret treasures are scattered between all 5 destinations. Each destination's treasure is protected by a boss that Scrooge must defeat to retrieve. When all 5 main treasures are collected, the player returns to Transylvania for a final boss fight against Dracula Duck. After defeating him, the player must contend with Flintheart Glomgold and Magica Dispel for the final treasure. Contra. Contra is a run-and-gun game developed and published by Konami for arcades in 1987. A home version was released for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1988 and was a critical and commercial success, with Electronic Gaming Monthly calling it the best action game of 1988. Contra employs a variety of playing perspectives, which include a standard side view, a pseudo 3D view in which the player proceeds by shooting and moving towards the background in addition to the left or right, and a fixed screen format in which the player has their gun aimed upwards by default. Up to 2 people can play simultaneously, with one player as Bill, the blonde-haired commando wearing a white tank top and blue bandana, and the other player as Lance, the shirtless dark-haired commando with a red bandana. The NES version is composed of 8 stages. In the final stage, the player fights through the enemy's final line of defense, which includes a hovercraft, armored trucks, and giant helmeted soldiers. The player must fight a giant alien head that spawns larvae from its mouth before reaching the final target, a cardiac creature that must be destroyed in order to complete the mission. Contra was one of the early NES games to feature the Konami code. Inputting the code at the title screen starts the player with 30 lives instead of the usual 3. The cheat remains in effect when the player runs out of lives and uses a continue to retry a stage. Castlevania. Castlevania is an action platform game developed and published by Konami in 1986. In the game, players control Simon Belmont, a descendant of a legendary vampire hunter who enters the castle of Count Dracula to destroy him when he suddenly reappears 100 years after Simon's ancestor vanquished him. Castlevania utilizes platform gameplay and is divided into 6 blocks of 3 stages each for a total of 18 stages. Simon can move, jump, crouch, climb stairs, and use a magic whip known in the series as the Vampire Killer as his primary combat weapon. The player fights a boss character, usually themed after a classic horror movie monster such as Frankenstein's monster or the Grim Reaper, at the end of each block, and must win the battle and pick up a red orb that restores all health before time runs out in order to advance. The ultimate goal is to defeat Count Dracula himself and the Curse of Man at the end of Stage 18, triggering the collapse of Dracula's castle and allowing the player to restart the game at an increased difficulty. Throughout the game, the player can find and use various backup weapons, including throwing knives, axes, vials of holy water that act as fiery grenades, a magical watch that can briefly freeze enemies, and sacred crosses that function as boomerangs. However, only one such weapon can be carried at a time. If the player picks up a new one or loses a life, the weapon is automatically lost. Castlevania is considered an NES classic by PC World, while Nintendo Power and Game Informer both rank it on their list of the best video games ever made. Double Dribble. Double Dribble was developed and released in arcades by Konami in 1986, then on the NES in 1987. It was the second basketball arcade video game by Konami following Super Basketball. It was considered the most realistic basketball sports video game upon release, with fast-paced action, detailed players, a large side-scrolling court, innovative cinematic slam dunks, and detailed sound effects, beginning a trend where presentation would play an increasingly important role in sports games. The NES version features 5-on-5 action on a horizontally scrolling court and 4 teams: the Boston Frogs, New York Eagles, Chicago Ox, and Los Angeles Breakers. It also features 3 levels of single-play difficulty and 4 choices of quarter lengths. Double Dribble was among the first games to feature cutscenes, which depicted a mid-air player completing a slam dunk, and one of the first to use speech, such as announcing the game title, the game's beginning jump ball, and some foul calls. And who could forget running to the corner to hit that automatic 3? Kung Fu. Kung Fu was a 1984 beat-em-up game developed and published by Irem for arcades, and then was distributed by Data East in North America. It was later ported for the NES by Nintendo. The player controls Thomas, a Kung Fu master, as he fights his way through the 5 levels of the Devil's Temple to rescue his girlfriend Sylvia from the crime boss Mr. X. As he ascends the tower, he has to fight many enemies along the way, and 5 end-of-level boss battles, a concept inspired by Game of Death. Thomas and each boss have a health meter, and the game temporarily becomes a one-on-one fighting game during boss battles. The bosses of the first 4 levels are Stick Fighter, Boomerang Fighter, Giant, and Black Magician. The boss of the 5th floor is Mr. X, the leader of the gang that kidnapped Sylvia. Once he is defeated, Thomas rescues Sylvia and the game restarts at a higher difficulty level. The simplicity of this side-scrolling martial arts game was what drew me to this instant classic in the arcades, but especially on the NES. The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda is an action-adventure game developed and published by Nintendo in 1986. The first game in the Legend of Zelda series, it is set in the fantasy land of Hyrule and centers on an elf-like boy named Link who aims to collect the 8 fragments of the Triforce of Wisdom to rescue Princess Zelda from Ganon. The Legend of Zelda incorporates elements of action, adventure, and role-playing genres. The player controls Link from a flip-screen overhead perspective as he travels the overworld, a large outdoor map with various environments. Link begins the game equipped with only a small shield, but can enter a cave and receive a sword from an old man who advises, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this." Throughout the adventure, Link finds and acquires various items that increase his abilities further, including heart containers, which increase his life meter, magic rings, which decrease the amount of damage Link takes from enemy attacks, and stronger swords, which allow Link to inflict more damage to enemies. Hidden in the overworld are entrances of 8 large dungeons, housing the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom. By acquiring these pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom from these dungeons, he gains access to a 9th and final dungeon in order to defeat Ganon and rescue Zelda. The Legend of Zelda has gone on to be one of the most popular and influential games of my lifetime. Super Mario Bros. Super Mario Bros. Was a platform game developed and published by Nintendo for the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. It is the successor to the 1983 arcade game Mario Bros. And the first game in the Super Mario Bros. Series. Players control Mario, or his brother Luigi in the multiplayer mode, to traverse Mushroom Kingdom in order to rescue Princess Toadstool from King Koopa, later renamed Bowser. They traverse side-scrolling stages while avoiding hazards such as enemies and pits, with the aid of power-ups such as the Super Mushroom, Fire Power, and Starman. Super Mario Bros. Is frequently cited as one of the greatest video games of all time, and is particularly admired for its precise controls. It has been re-released on most Nintendo systems and is one of the best-selling games of all time, with more than 58 million copies sold worldwide. It is credited alongside the NES as one of the key factors in reviving the video game industry after the 1983 crash, and helped popularize the side-scrolling platform game genre. Pro Wrestling. Pro Wrestling was a wrestling video game developed and published by Nintendo. Pro Wrestling was the 3rd wrestling game on the Nintendo Entertainment System after Tag Team Match Muscle and Tag Team Wrestling. The player chooses a character from a roster of 6 wrestlers, each with a unique set of wrestling moves. In addition to punching, kicking, and running attacks, wrestlers may lock up with each other to execute body slams, pile drivers, and other professional wrestling moves. Wrestlers are also able to climb the top 2 turnbuckles for additional high-flying attacks. Matches are one-on-one with no option for tag team bouts. Downed opponents may be hauled up from the mat, allowing the opponent a window to execute additional attacks, or may be pinned instead. As in professional wrestling, a wrestler who is pinned for a 3 count loses the match. Single-player mode consists of 2 parts. First, the player fights in matches against increasingly difficult CPU opponents. After winning 5 matches, the player fights King Slender, the Video Wrestling Association champion. If the player has selected King Slender for play, then he will face Giant Panther for the VWA Championship, though some versions of the game have a bug requiring King Slender to win more than the usual 5 matches before being granted the title shot. After winning the title, the second stage of gameplay begins. Making 10 successful title defenses will result in a title match against the Great Puma, champion of the Video Wrestling Federation. Defeating Puma will make a player the interpromotional VWA VWF champion and end the game. It is worth noting that some Nintendo aficionados consider the Great Puma to be one of the most difficult boss characters to ever appear on the NES. Tecmo Bowl. Tecmo Bowl for the Nintendo Entertainment System was released in 1989 and was the first console game to include real National Football League players, via a license from the NFL Players Association. The NES version allows 2 players to play rather than the arcade's 4. The player can choose between 3 modes: 1 player, 2 player, and coach. The playbook consists of only 4 offensive plays. When on defense, a player selects a play based on the anticipation of the offense's choice. If chosen correctly, it results in a collapse of the offensive line and well-covered receivers, therefore setting up either a potential sack or an interception. Tecmo Bowl contains 12 teams, each equipped with 4 plays. Most teams have 2 running plays and 2 passing plays. The exceptions are San Francisco and Miami, who have 3 passing plays and only 1 running play. If you were a fan of Tecmo Bowl, you knew that using the Los Angeles team and Bo Jackson would allow you to dominate the ground game and conquer your opponent. Bo Jackson's character in Tecmo Bowl was called the greatest video game athlete of all time by ESPN and USA Today, and some gamers claim that Jackson's character could run for as many as 1,000 yards in a single game. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Was a boxing video game developed and published by Nintendo for the NES in 1987. Part of the Punch-Out! Series, it is an adaptation of the arcade game Punch-Out! Released in 1984. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Features Little Mac, a young boxer fighting his way through the ranks of the World Video Boxing Association. After facing a series of colorful fictional opponents in 3 circuits and winning the championship in each, Little Mac enters a final dream fight against the real-life heavyweight champion during the time, Mike Tyson. Little Mac faces a total of 14 opponents, 3 in the minor circuit, 4 in the major circuit, 6 in the world circuit, and of course, Mike Tyson. All character sprites except for King Hippo are reused for 2 characters each, with changes made to the colors, head, or special moves. 3 opponents from the minor and major circuits reappear in the world circuit with new attacks that force the player to devise a new strategy. The behavior of each opposing boxer follows a set pattern requiring trial and error and memorization to defeat them. Mike Tyson's Punch-Out! Makes my number 1 spot simply for the fact I was a huge fan of the original arcade game and spent many of my early years trying to work my way up to become heavyweight champion for the world. 0073735963